I think most of you know me, but I'm Lucie Lalumière. I'm the president of Interactive Ontario. So today is a very important discussion. Most of you have seen the announcement by government, the Ontario government yesterday, announced reopening the economy on a stage approach, and interactive digital media and game were mentioned as part of the reintroduction of businesses. And Kelly Lynne is going to explain a bit more about that. In parallel to that, a lot of you are wondering, okay, so how are we going to organize work in the future? Are we going to continue from home? Can we send people at work? Under what conditions? What are our legal obligations? So there's a lot of questions and a lot of unknowns right now. So we've asked Lynne Ashton to start looking at this, and today is an open discussion. So we're not bringing you answers today. We want to hear from you so we can figure out how we can help the industry over the next few weeks. So I'm going to introduce Kelly Lynne. Most of you also know Kelly Lynne. She's a screen-based policy and research consultant. And Kelly Lynne has been working with IO for over 6 years on policy issues, and she's been instrumental in our advocacy work. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Kelly Lynne to start the session.
Thank you, Lucie. So just to go over again what the government just announced, because we were preparing this before, and then last minute sort of pivot because they made their announcement yesterday. So we are now in stage 1 of phase 2 of the COVID response. So it's the restart phase and the first, the restart phase and the first stage of the restart phase, which is allowing specific industries to open up. And as of Tuesday, with a few exceptions for things like marinas and other outdoor activities for the long weekend. Interactive digital media was specifically included under media. So there's radio, film and television, publishing, but it's for operations involving equipment that does not allow for remote working. So what's been emphasized is that even though, and I really like this quote that someone from the government called Lucie and said, it's not because you're allowed to do it that you should. So they're really encouraging companies that if you are successfully remote working, that you continue to remote work. And then if this stage is successful and it works well, then at some undetermined time, yet to be determined time, will expand out. And there will be more businesses that can open, more businesses will be encouraged. So to sort of back up to the employer obligation, the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act sets out the employer's obligations. You have an obligation to create a safe work environment, and you always have. There is a structure in place to make sure that employers do it and to assist employers to do it. That has now been expanded with additional guidelines under the Ministry of Labour and the Ontario Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. And they've tried to create some sector-specific guidelines for returning to office work. There is nothing for IDM. We're being referred to the office guidelines. There are film and television ones. They're not very comprehensive, I have to say. They're not terribly detailed. If you look at them, a lot of it is common sense. It's making sure that there's hand sanitizer, increasing your frequency of cleaning services, restricting your guests, and opening windows. I think that was another one, so that there is more of an airflow. So I think that members are looking for more guidance and probably have more specific issues that are not being addressed by what the government has done so far. Now, what I don't know is whether this is just the first stage and they'll develop better guidelines. But I think there are things that companies can do on their own to create guidelines that will, or protocols that will work for them. One thing to point out is that under the existing occupational health and safety legislation, there is the ability for the Ministry of Labor to send inspectors to ensure that companies are creating a safe environment for their employees. We don't know, I mean, there's only so many inspectors. We're not sure whether they're going to be hiring more people to enforce the rules and the guidelines. We'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, I think the idea of creating for each company to create their own protocols so that everyone on staff knows, I think that's a really good idea. I've done a little bit of looking at other jurisdictions to see what they've done so far. And a really great source is New Zealand, which is ahead of us in the response. And I'm just going to make a little bit of reference because we want to open things up to to the group for questions and comments. But WorkSafe New Zealand is a really great organization that they are part of the New Zealand government, but they are working in partnership with industry. So the industry develops detailed protocols for their sector, which are then approved by WorkSafe New Zealand. And then as a company, when you reopen, you have to commit to abide by those guidelines. And WorkSafe can go in and do an audit to make sure that you have. So it may be that if we don't have detailed enough protocols here, that we'll look to other jurisdictions like New Zealand for those sorts of things. There's also Canada Public Health. They set up a list of questions that they ask companies to consider in developing their own protocols. And one of the things that they are talking about, and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce did similar, is it's business continuity planning. And this is a concept that's been out there for a while with larger companies. And it's about making sure that you have all the plans in place should there be an earthquake or flood, natural disaster. And now let's have business continuity planning for COVID, for a second wave of COVID, should that happen in the fall. And I think the Canada Public Health list of questions is a really good place to start in developing your own business continuity planning. So with that as sort of the opening framework, we'd like to know, and if people can, I guess, are we going to unmute everybody or?
Yes, I will.
Okay. So my first question is, what are your concerns about going back to work in an office?
Well, I guess I can start. I think, you know, the way I see it is, you know, we're now almost 2 months into this process. And I think it took a fair amount of time for people to transition to remote workspaces and get into a consistent work pattern and find the flow within their teams. So aside from any legal liability and, you know, trying to get the office set up for this new normal, having everyone move back to an office setting to only potentially have to make them go back to remote if there's another uptick seems to, you know, I think it'll be a big interference in terms of productivity in the short term until we establish if this is something that will be the new normal or if it's something that's just sort of a little blip.
I'll go next. I agree with Mary. It's, you know, it took some time for all of us to get, I mean, we're in a co-working space and most of our team works remote anyways, but we would have weekly check-ins where we'd all get together at the office and meet in person and chat. And, you know, because most of our team's remote, we're not necessarily in a hurry to get back to the office, but also some of the people who would come into our office, I actually know do have immunity issues. So I'm really not in a hurry to have my team return to the office because I don't want my team who already has autoimmune issues to get sick. And then, you know, not just like COVID, but the fact she'd have to take transit, she'd have to get there, you're around everything else. And it's just like, I don't want that responsibility and I want her to stay healthy. So we're not in any hurry. And I'm with Mary. It's like, you know, a second wave is possible. We don't know the extent of it. If it's minimum, yay. But if it's another, like everyone shut down again for a month, it's like, oh my gosh, here we go again. So I'd rather kind of wait it out.
Could people identify themselves before they speak? Sorry.
That was Sasha.
I knew that it was, and I knew the one before was Mary. But, you know, I don't know everybody's voice.
I can go again. It's Mary again. I think the other, and to add on to what Sasha just said, you know, especially for team members that have to take transit and other things, I think there's a lot of mental stress on some people's part in terms of going back to an office environment. And then obviously as an employer having to deal with employees' mental health and their other concerns and how that impacts the workplace and maybe has negative connotations to it. I think that's something employers need to consider. How are you as an employer going to be viewed if it seems as though you're almost forcing people to do something that perhaps they're not comfortable with? And then what is also the legalities around, can you actually force people to come back to work if they've been working in a remote setting? How do you define what is possible to do remotely versus what is not convenient? And where's that line?
Yeah, that's a really good point, that because the government has not given any kind of clarity to any of the terms that they're using. And when they say not possible, you know, it's like, is it not practical or completely impossible?
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, I think that's one of the big questions that there isn't enough guidance on.
Sorry, this is Erica from Phantom Compass. Right now, like our company was primarily remote to begin with. So, I mean, this transition hasn't been as bad for us as many other companies, but a few other considerations for us is that we have a lot of parents in our company, and if schools and daycares and even just general babysitting isn't an option, I don't know how practical it would be to get people to do, you know, it's hard enough as it is working from home with children, but also just having you know, unless those things are options, you know, more openly available again. I think having people leave the house might be more problematic as well, because then who's watching the kids? And the other piece that I personally worry about is, you know, is equipment sharing. You know, we have with
Sorry, we lost you just for a second.
Oh, I guess I muted. Yeah, sorry. I was just saying the equipment, specialized equipment like testing, test kits and things like that, that do need to be shared between employees is another concern for myself, just wanting to make sure that we're able to, you know, like, I don't know, like, how do you, other than just dipping everything in sanitizer, you know, is that enough for me to keep people safe?
So, Erica, it's Lucy. By the way, when I mute everybody, then we lost Erica. So, and maybe Erica, it was you with the background noise. When I talked to government, I got a call this morning because they wanted me to know that they included interactive digital media and games in their stage 1. But as Kellyn said, they were quite adamant to say it's not because you're allowed to that you should do it. So I said to them, okay, so, you know, I think mocap is very clear in everybody's head that this cannot happen unless people go to the office. But I said to him, well, what about people who are in a very, very small apartment with a lot of people around and they just can't work because of the context? And he said, the first thing he said, Lucy, we're not allowed to give legal advice. So basically he was telling me people have to get their own legal advice. He said, you can, but make sure that your employees are safe because ultimately the employers are obligated to ensure the safety of their employee. So, and I think, Kellyn, that's why they cannot go in details right now in terms of the guidelines, because they have to allow some flexibility, hoping that the employers will assess case by case. And to your point, Erica, people with kids, it's very difficult right now for them to work, do homeschooling, and do babysitting at the same time. So anyway, I think having a more legal advice is going to be something that we may want to have for the industry over the next few weeks.
Another question that I've got for people is, do you have concerns, and I think Erica brought up one of them, that are specific to IDM? So you were talking about the need to share equipment and testing equipment. I think that's something that is maybe not unique to IDM. It also exists in film and television, but in the cultural industries, this is something. Are there other concerns that are related specifically to the kind of work that you do?
By the way, I know some of you on the line will return some employees. So please speak out, because we need to learn about what you're thinking of doing and the challenges that you have right now.
Okay, on that point, here's another question maybe somebody can answer. Has anybody on the line developed their own protocols yet for how they're going to return to the office?
So it's Mary again. So we have not, because we've made the decision that we are not returning to work, at least for the foreseeable future. However, I think it's imperative upon every employer that will be returning to work to ensure that everything is documented and that they have a documented training session to all staff when they come back, indicating what the standard practice will be. And I would even go as far as taking pictures and having those kept in a file, evidencing, you know, the spaces between the desks, plexiglass, whatever, where the sanitizer is going to be located, so that it's not only that you've made your employees aware, but you've documented how you've done it and what you've done.
Okay, I'd like to ask, is there anybody here who's actually planning to go back into the office in the near future?
Hi there. Sorry. It's
Go ahead.
yeah, it's Chang. I'm from Ubisoft. So yes, we are thinking of rolling out some of our employees who are critically blocked to go back to work, and we are giving a bit of time between the start date until we actually are bringing people in. So one of the items that I wanted to kind of tackle on was the fact that in addition to, all the onboarding and all of the walkthroughs and the PPE that we will provide to our employees, we also will provide training with occupational therapists to talk about the stresses of being back at work in a very different context and different environment. And, even the feeling of having to be vigilant, of your surrounding that can cause quite a bit of a disruption. So in addition to some of the health and the actual physical space, we're also looking to all of the mental health effects that it will have for our team members as well. And I think that's going to be significantly more challenging for us because we're thinking of rolling people back in phases. So a very small group of people at the start and then adding on more people. So we're making sure that we're adapting well. But the more people that are in the studio is going to create significantly more problems, I guess, and more stresses. So we want to make sure that we address that from the beginning. So right now, I think the biggest challenge that we have is definitely on the mocap side, because I think we're getting a bit of a mixed feedback that, for us, I do want to bring this up to see if anybody has some feedback as to, if we are able to ensure physical distancing between our team members and the cast, because we're doing one-person shoots. Is that still possible, given that right now it doesn't look like it is?
So when you say it doesn't look like it is, that was one example that was given to me this morning by government, because they've been told by industry that for mocap, obviously, people need to return to work. So what do you mean when you say it looks like it's not possible?
Well, just because I guess the overall guideline that was put out into the first wave that get returned, it specifically says film and television kind of is not part of it yet.
Yeah, it's bringing people together into one location for a shoot isn't allowed. If it's one person, that may be okay.
Yeah.
Again, these aren't sort of strict regulations. I think it's going to depend on what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. And I'm not sure that you can do mocap physically distant.
So there is there's a couple of things that we could potentially do in terms of mocap shoots that we're trying to test out at least, and that's the reason why we're bringing one person in. We're doing just gameplay shoots right now, and we have kind of employees sectioned up in zones, so they are not allowed to leave that zone when they do the shoots. And it's just going to be, because it's gameplay, it's just going to be one person doing on the stage. While everybody else is locked into the zone and they're not allowed to kind of step out of it, to make sure that we're complying with the distancing rule. So that's what we're proposing. My worry is, you've mentioned the fact that you brought up, inspection that can come in, and if anybody comes in and they decided that we can't shoot, or we're fine or whatever, and that potentially could delay us even further. So it's hard to get that clarity.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you're going to get it.
Okay.
I think everybody has to do their best and work to the highest possible standards. And I think it also applies to insurance.
Yes.
They're going to want to make sure that you don't have the liability because you've done all the possible things you could.
Yeah. So that's definitely the biggest hurdle, but overall, kind of the employee at the office space, that's exactly what we're doing right now. There was an interesting thing that was brought up about the actual physical space, about opening windows, because we're also getting information from our engineers that say we shouldn't open windows. We should just increase the actual like HVAC and airflow, and then changing our filters. So it's so we do have to go back now to verify that. So that's very interesting to see. But yes, sorry to take too much of your time.
No, in fact, yeah, and I was going to say, Trang, you mentioned PPE. So for the employees that you're bringing back, you're going to ask them to wear a mask inside. How is it going to work?
So yes, so we definitely have to, so from everything that we've read so far, even when it comes to, you know, like cotton mask, we will provide like disposable mask, but also like reusable mask as well. The idea is that if you have social distancing, physical distancing, if you have mask, if you're washing your hands regularly, and so all of these things combined will help. So for us, the idea is that we will ask our employee, because at the end of the day, if you don't do one of those things, it kind of like just invalidate a lot of the work that we're trying to do. So we're providing there's a few videos on Toronto Public Health on how to wear masks. So we're putting that in our orientation. We will also ask that our employee wear mask at all time while they're walking around the studio. You know, they can take off their mask when they're at their desk, of course. And also we're providing masks so that, like reusable masks especially, so that they can wear them on their way to work as well if necessary. But right now we're not allowing people to take transit to get to work. So yes, mask is definitely highly encouraged. Actually, we ask that it must be done until it's, you know, we're told that it's safe to not wear a mask. Yeah.
And this is Mary. Are you going to be enforcing anything like temperature checks in the morning, or asking employees to sign something that says they're symptom-free or anything of that nature?
Yes, so from what we're doing is it's a two-pronged approach. We will have screening before employees enter the space. The screening is set like so that it provides privacy. So, you know, when we do a temperature check, you know, it's just the employee and the screener that will be there. It's the touchless temperature check. Although, you know, we check with our lawyer and it's not, you know, 100% clear right now as to whether or not we can refuse people if the temperature changes. But at this time, we're asking our employees to comply with that as a way for us to make sure we're keeping everyone safe. So it's just about communication, that we're taking your temperature just to make sure that, you know, because a lot of our employees don't even have thermometers at home to test their own temperature. So it's also to make sure that they also have an idea if they do show symptoms, and they're also keeping employees safe. So but we're not logging the temperature, which is whether or not it just pass or fail. You can create, like, you know, there's a lot of tools that you can use to create like a list of pre-screened questions. So we're thinking right now using like I think it's Power Apps or different tools on SharePoint that allow us to, like, we can give the employee a bunch of screening questions ahead of time, and once they fill those questions, it would generate like a pass or a fail kind of instruction with a code, a scanning code. So when they come to our studio, while the code will get scanned, and if it's a pass, then they go and get the temperature check. If it gets passed, then they access our studio. So that allows us to reduce the wait time between screens. Because we don't want a lot of people waiting in line to answer their questions and to also, you know, get screened at the same time, get the temperature check. So so that's something that we're trying to implement as well. But again, we haven't really tested it out yet. But we were thinking that we're thinking that if we can start testing it out, we're testing it out with a small group of people, so then we can work out all the kink. So yes, screening question and temperature check.
Sorry, go ahead, Kellen.
No, I was just going to say, so it does sound like Ubisoft has developed some protocols, or at least maybe in the process of developing and testing protocols.
Yes.
So, and I was going to say, you mentioned that you're not going to allow people to take public transit, to go to work. Is that?
Well, not at this time. So when we're thinking about we are asking right now our productions to list out kind of employees that are critically blocked.
Mm-hmm.
But when we survey these employees, we ask if they are taking transit or if they feel comfortable to come back to work, if they have any personal reasons why they don't want to come back to work. So that way, because we want to make sure that it's completely voluntary, but we do also, even if our employees volunteer to come back to work, if they take transit, that's a disqualifier for us. So we also have some guideline on our end to make sure that it's both way. So right now we think that public transit is not really safe yet for our employees to take. So we're gonna try to address that as we go further into the plan. But for now, is public transit is not included in the first phase.
And you had a question about mocap, and I see Cynthia Lynch is now on the line. And I'm wondering, Cynthia, has there been any discussion about mocap specifically yet within the film and TV industry, and how are people managing this? Is there anything you can share with us?
Hi, everyone. Apologies for being late. There hasn't been specific conversations that I've been part of about motion capture. In general, sort of when people are on a studio or in a studio or on a set, the types of things, even if you just talk about regular physical production and like wiring people up for sound, the types of things that are being considered in that area are, you know, people are going to be putting their own mics on, you know, only one person per camera. So if you are using a camera, you're the only person using that camera. Or if they must be shared, they need to be disinfected between each use. Any physical spaces that you're in obviously need to be disinfected daily or more often if there's a changeover of personnel in those places. So all sort of things like that. If you have to share equipment and you can't disinfect it, then you need to use some sort of disposable cover on that equipment so that you can change those covers in between whoever's using it. Yeah, so specifically about motion capture, that's the extent that I have heard about that.
Thank you, Cynthia. There's a question in the chat room about voiceover. Erica, I think it's coming from you. Can you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, that's something, I mean, we don't have an immediate need, but it is definitely, well, I know of other people who do have immediate needs for voiceover, and we've just been kind of holding our breath, waiting to see whether we need to make major alternative changes or release dates or development. I hadn't seen the film and television guidelines. I was wondering if the voiceover was covered in there. As well as, like, you know, or if there's anything with the unions, whether they're allowing people to go into studios or not, even if it's, you know, it's tend to be one at a time anyway. So I wasn't sure if that was covered or not.
Cynthia, any comments on voiceover?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So Everything will change on Tuesday, of course. There have been instances where people have been going into studios where they can be the only person in the room. Those have been few and far between. And I know this more about SoundPost, but what some companies have been doing is they have created sort of portable kits that they are sending out to the performers, so the performers can sort of set up their own home studio and get a good quality recording that the post facility knows is a good quality recording because they're using that facility's equipment, and they're sort of working in real time with someone, and the post facilities like even send a laptop with the equipment to make sure that everything is up to standard. That's obviously not a sustainable model. It was interesting to hear Trang talk about HVAC and having windows open, because certainly in terms of voiceover and that sort of work, people are being encouraged, since you can't have your windows open, to upgrade their HVAC or at least take a look at them to make sure they are sufficient to protect people. And then the same sorts of things, like only one person per microphone, only one person per headset, only one person, or have those changed in between. Keep only one person in the actual studio at a time. In the outside space, make sure you can have physical distancing. All those standard things that would apply to any facility would apply to that as well.
Thank you.
And I think you said you hadn't seen the guidelines yet. The Section 21 committee is working on guidelines to have them submitted to the government for approval by June 1st. So hopefully the government has committed, the Ministry of Labor has committed to turning that approval around very quickly. So hopefully there will be something to post shortly after that time. But they are guidelines, and so as Kelly Lynn was saying earlier, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you must do X, you must do Y. It's sort of best practice, and then you need to look at your own workplace and figure out how you can make it work.
Yeah, I think that's the way we're going to be going forward, is because everybody's office space is unique. Some are in, large buildings, others main floor entrances, co-working space. Depending on the kind of games or interactive digital media that you create, your needs are going to be specific. Is there anything other than voiceover or mocap that is unique to IDM that people can think of?
The sharing of equipment, one company told me they do a lot of QA, and they share a lot of equipment between their QA employees. So they were trying to figure out how do they do this in a safe way. No clear solution yet.
Another thought I just had when you said QA was user testing. That's something, you bring people in, or you go to a group of people, and that's going to be a problem now. Okay. So if you're going to be developing your own protocols that are specific to your business, is there information, guidelines, particular areas where you need support, need extra help with to be able to create your own guidelines? Questions that have already occurred to you?
I was just going to say, I think you already hit on that. It was legal support. Like if there are, is like, am I putting people at risk because I'm not doing, temperature checks? Like if that is like the expected thing, I want to know that, or am I violating people's rights by asking them to do temperature checks? So those kinds of things would be good supports. And I know my lawyers that I normally deal with won't know that offhand.
Yeah.
Maybe another question for Tran. Visitors, obviously you're not going to allow visitors for stage 1, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so we, right now for stage 1, the only external people that can enter our sites will be vendors for cleanings. And we also will be screening the vendors for that purpose. And then hopefully what we will do is kind of test out, because we are developing like a kind of a set expectations on the vendor side as to what they need to, you know, similar to the same expectation we set to our employees. So we might adopt some of that expectation and bring that over when we are allowed visitors to come in. So, you know, we will be thinking about, you know, you did mention about like user research, and, you know, if we do need to do external testing and when we bring visitors in the future, we will adapt the same kind of philosophy that we would do with our current vendors right now, the people who are doing the maintenance. Yeah. But I really don't think that will happen until, I would say, phase 3 for us. Yeah.
Sasha here. I know at our co-working space, they actually have allowed provisions for visitors because there's different industries housed in the facility, but they're requiring every visitor to check in. Every visitor has to go through the same kind of health protocol. They're looking at putting heat sensors in at the entrances. And so they're basically, it's like if you're having a visitor, they're making it like really difficult, but the sign in, sign out thing, I think was an interesting thing that they've added to it. And I'm sure that's just a track spread in the event they need to, so.
Yes. Yeah, I think for us, the idea of having visitors right now is that we can control which our employees getting to work, for example, using their own cars. If we're putting a policy that people can't take transit to go to work, but if we're allowing visitors that we don't know how they get to work, or, you know, they're kind of, you know, it's hard for us to enforce and it's a lot of behavior, then I think that will be something that we can't allow. So yeah, it's really based on the policy that we're setting for our employees, and we're going to apply that with the same mindset to our visitors in the future as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that, Cynthia, you posted that, but the film and TV guidelines did mention it right off the top. I didn't find them all that detailed. So I think and
those were actually published quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
So they do change, but they do have sort of guiding principles, and they do have some information on screening. So the Section 21 guidelines are going to suggest that everybody should be screened when going into work. You, as the employer, does have the responsibility to keep people, keep that information private. And that screening, ideally, and this won't be people who are smaller companies won't be able to do this, but ideally it's a 2-stage process. So there's the original, whether it's a temperature check. If you fail the temperature check, that doesn't mean you get sent home, but you have a further conversation, ideally with someone who is either a medical professional or has received specialized training, to ask follow-up questions to decide whether or not to send someone home. Under the Employment Standards Act, you can send someone home, or the revisions to the Employment Standards Act that were made at the beginning of the emergency, you can send someone home, but you still have to pay them.
I'll be honest, I wondered about that with the scanning. Medication I'm on and health conditions that I have means that my body temperature naturally runs really high. So when we get our heat sensors at our new space, one of the things we have to do is see if I set it off when I'm having one of my bad days, because it's like, I'm curious how that happens if you have other conditions that give you fever. So that's interesting to know, Cynthia. Thanks.
Yeah, and that is one of the reasons for the secondary screening. The other thing is, and I think someone touched on this briefly already, but if people have underlying conditions that will make them reluctant to come into work, or will require them to have extra health and safety precautions, it's something that, again, the onus is on them to disclose it, but the employer will need to accommodate that. And then, of course, keep it private. So, two parts to that.
Yeah. Okay, the other thing we wanted to raise or ask people is what other things would help a return to work in your office? What are going to be the challenges other than guidelines and protocols? But what, like, is it going to be extra cost of things? Even knowing where to get some of these things. If you're, for example, there was the talk about having an occupational therapist on staff or medical professionals. What are the kinds of things you've already thought about? This is where I'm going to need help, and I have no idea how to get it, or I have no idea. Anyone?
Well, I think even just in regard to, basic things like Lysol wipes, masks, sanitizers, like a lot of these things are in short supply and it's hard to find even just for home use. So obviously, once you move into an office setting, the amount of product and where to source it and what happens if you can't source it. So I think there's a lot of like very little things or that seem minimal until you actually start to put it into practice.
In fact, the provincial government, I didn't go, but yesterday they announced a new site, or the day before, with sources for PPEs. So I don't know, anyone has gone to that website and see if there's, relevant information? I'm assuming so, but anyone? No.
I haven't yet. Do you mind sharing that source with us?
Yeah, I'll find it and I will post it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
One thing, I mean, I don't know how big of a problem this is. It could be just my location I'm in outside of the GTA. So, but just getting standard computer equipment is getting a little bit tricky. I'm finding that, the supply chain's being interrupted. So I'm not able to necessarily get the computer hardware that I need locally, and I'm having to order it further afield.
Yeah, I don't think that's just where you are. I think as everybody is working at home, there's a much bigger demand on the supply chain, and I think that is a significant issue. I think it's impossible to get a Nintendo Switch anywhere, for example.
Yes, although I think that Nintendo actually still has them. If you're a developer, I think you can get them.
Okay, but that's also, that's another issue to put on the list.
Anyone? Yeah, I was going to say probably the same thing. We really need to hear from you guys, and some of you, I know employees that you're thinking of sending back home. So please, any concern you have that we haven't talked about, that's really helpful to us to know about.
I do just talking about the co-working space, because our company does primarily work from home, but we do often use co-working spaces. Just because it's something that I've really put out of my head. I haven't really been thinking about it too much. Because I've just said that we're not going to do it until I know 100% it's safe to go back to the co-working. But I am wondering, like, if there is, if you are going into a co-working space, like I have I don't have full control over the environment. And I guess, like I said, I think the outcome of that would be that I just wouldn't send people there. But I am wondering if there is anything kind of in place for guidelines. Like, I don't know if our co-working space is not discussed opening yet, but you know, or if there are guidelines that we can recommend. I mean, I think, Sasha, maybe if you could pass out your guidelines along, that would be awesome.
Me too. Yeah, it's I've been really impressed actually with our space, and so I can forward that email to as many of you that I know, or sent to Lucy and Stephanie, and they can send it out to everyone. It's really comprehensive too. I've been quite surprised. Another one that's probably going to be organized is forget the name of it. They're a big one downtown. I'll see if I can remember who they are, because I can't see how they can service Bay Street and not, like, they have 3 locations on Bay Street, and I can't see how they don't have really solid guidelines as well. So yeah, I'll dig those up and send them around.
Any other thoughts? Questions?
So Kellen, maybe we should summarize what we think we can do. So we heard you about, you know, if we could find legal advice and organize a session with somebody who's an expert in the obligation of the employers under COVID. If any of you have suggestions as to who we should approach, let us know. There's that. There was also sharing information. I think, you know, what we hear is that you guys would like us to share information about pretty much any kind of protocols that are developed by some of you, if you're willing to share it. And Cynthia, by the way, thank you so much for sharing what you've done with the film and TV industry. That's helpful. Kellen, anything else that you've noted that is actionable for us to do?
No, I think that's it. It's the sharing the information that we find. So have we shared widely the existing guidelines from the Ontario Health and Safety?
No, that's a good point. In fact, Stephanie, for our next e-blast, we should have that in there.
And then I do like the Canada Public Health just list of, and it's just a link that can be shared. And it's a list of questions that just make companies think about how to prepare. So, and as we find things in other jurisdictions, we can share those. Mm-hmm. It's all about everybody working together to get the best information and best practices.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that's it.
So any last comment before we wrap up? So I'm going to thank Kelly Lynn. Thank you so much for preparing this and doing some of the legwork. Thank you all for participating. The information is super important, as we said. You know, if you think of something else, you know how to reach some of us, please reach us. And we're going to get back to you with more information, and we will find somebody that has some legal advice, because I think that's critical for all of us to know more about our legal obligations. So on that, I'm going to thank everyone and hope that you're going to be able to relax a bit over the long weekend. Thank you all. Bye.
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 Bye.